I'll be breaking down The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, a 16th century Italian diplomat born to Florentine nobility. Your question should be, how is it that a book that's 500 years old, written in 1513, how is it that that book can apply to my life today? And I'm going to answer that question with the very best analysis that you will find anywhere on The Prince. I'll do it in the following format. I'll provide you a quotation direct from Machiavelli. Then I'll provide you with an interpretation to elucidate and clarify the true meaning of his words. And lastly, I'll provide you with an application, meaning how do you apply this to your life today? This book is a true classic, a book that has been said to be wicked, evil. But what it really is a manual for ruling effectively, a guide to power, a book written for princes on how to best and most effectively lead. First, allow me to give you some background on Machiavelli and the time in which he operated so you can better understand this book. Machiavelli was born to Florentine nobility, so it was natural that he would go into government. By the time he went into government, it was the Florentine Republic that was ruling, something similar to a democracy. Eventually, the Medici family took power back, and upon them taking power, they threw a great many people who were in government at the time into prison. Machiavelli was one of those individuals. While in prison, he was tortured. The only thing that saved him from his incarceration was a general amnesty offered by Pope Leo X. And Pope Leo X was Giovanni de' Medici. So when he became Pope, he offered a general amnesty, and as a result, Machiavelli was one of many who were freed from their incarceration. Upon Machiavelli's release, he started writing. What was yielded by his work is the volume that we today call The Prince, although he never called it The Prince. And in 1532, he offered this work to the magnificent Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici. And the reason he offered this book to the ruler of Florence is because he wanted a job. His hope was that the ruler, Lorenzo de' Medici, would see that he was wise and knowledgeable in the ways of great and powerful men and offer him a position within the government. This did not end up happening. What you must understand this work as is a guide to power for the rulers of principalities. The Prince is not an enthralling read in the narrative format where it provides you one story that goes on in a linear fashion throughout the book. Rather, it constantly references different monarchs that were well known during Machiavelli's day, but today these names cause you to have to do a lot of background research. That's why you need me to break this down. So what I'm going to do is go through this whole book, page by page, chapter by chapter, and take all of the relevant parts and the narratives and the short anecdotes that provide meaning to you. And I am going to provide you the quotation, the interpretation, and the application. What I want you to know about this book is that it should be viewed as a guide to power, how to acquire it, how to maintain it, and how to avoid losing it. And before I get into the book, just a summary on how you should understand Niccolo Machiavelli, the author, is maybe understand him as a Robert Greene kind of figure. Obviously, he's the father of these Robert Greene types, but he's similar in that he is an academic or an intellectual, an observer, one who has seen the ways, actions of wise and effective leaders, but has never actually been one. So he does not execute the strategies that he's describing in his personal life. Though people might use the term Machiavellian to mean ruthless, Machiavelli in his personal conduct was not ruthless. He was not known to be a man who was shrewd and extremely effective in his affairs. He is describing people who are. He is describing great men. He is not describing his own disposition and personality. But do appreciate this work, for indeed it is an objective work that provides meaningful insight that you can use today. So let us start our analysis of The Prince with the following quote, which will indeed set the stage for not only the knowledge that you're going to gain, but what you need to do with this knowledge. Because Machiavelli was not writing to give you knowledge. He was writing to inspire action. As we enter the timeless wisdom of Machiavelli, let us begin with this quotation to set the stage. Quote, "Fortune, like women, are similar in that it is the bold rather than the cautious man who will win them and hold them." End quote. Let us begin. Chapter 1, Machiavelli describes two types of principalities: the principalities that are hereditary and the principalities that are newly acquired. When we say principalities, we're talking in a literal sense about a territory in which a prince or an autocrat or a monarch is ruling subjects or citizens, you might say. So he's talking about these two different types. And the first thing he does is he differentiates the two types of principalities. One, you've inherited because your parents were kings and queens and you're now the prince. In the other case, you have this newly acquired principality because you've conquered someone. The first quote of chapter 1 that I want to present to you is as follows, page 7, quote, "He who believes that new favors will cause great personages to forget old injuries deceives himself," end quote. The interpretation: he who thinks new favors, meaning if you're doing something for someone, will cause great personages, meaning individuals, to forget old injuries, meaning things you've done wrong to them, deceives himself. So if you think that even though you've done something wrong to someone in the past, if you're nice today, they'll forgive and forget. The fact is that human beings are extremely petty, and generally speaking, unless they're Jesus, they're not going to forgive and forget you. You best believe that they are harboring that on the inside, and the moment they have the chance to strike at you, ideally for them striking at you without you knowing, they're going to do it, because people do not forget the wrongdoings that you do to them. So Machiavelli starts out by letting you know that if you believe that a new favor that you do for someone is going to cause them to forget an old injury you have caused them, you are deceiving yourself. So he's warning you to be on guard. The reason that's relevant to this first chapter, when we're talking about the two different types of principalities, is because if you're in a new principality, you probably had to conquer someone to create your new kingdom, right? You had to take over power. So whomever you took power from, they will never forget that injury, that loss of status, that loss of power. And surely you should not allow them to remain in your sphere and remain uncrippled, because they will do you harm. And one of the reasons a lot of folks say Machiavelli's book is wicked is because he specifically says, if you have taken over a new kingdom, the first thing you need to do is murder the former leader. You need to murder the prince and his whole family, and as much of his family as you can get to. Why is that? Because if you leave his family around, there will always be someone there to organize against you, and they will have that popular last name. For example, the fact that Donald Trump is president now and Barack Obama is still alive, he's like a pest to Trump. When the next Democrat runs against Trump, Barack Obama is going to support them. Currently, Barack Obama definitely says things to deride Trump. You never want to leave the former leader alive, because they will be an organizing symbol. You don't want to leave their family alive, because their family and their family name is something people can organize around. Think about it. George Bush Sr. was president. Years later, his son was president. It's not uncommon. For example, people say Michelle Obama should run for president because she's talented. No, just because her last name is Obama and we associate her with the greatness of his presidency. I say greatness for those who think he had a great presidency. So I hope you understand why Machiavelli makes that recommendation. You must eradicate the former leader when you take over power in a new principality. Obviously, in the case of democracies where you have, say, a Donald Trump, he's not going to murder all of the Obamas because he doesn't plan to rule forever. But you can see how the Obamas are working against his interests to take away his power, i.e., stop him from getting a second term. The next quotation, page 7, quote, "Ferdinand of Aragon accomplished many things under the cloak of religion, while having no faith, having no humanity, having no mercy, and no integrity. Had he allowed himself to be influenced by such motives, he surely would have met his ruin." End quote. This is a meaningful quotation. The interpretation is that when he says he accomplished many things under the cloak of religion, meaning that he used religion as a cloak, meaning something that conceals, it hides what he's really doing. People look at him and they see a religious, God-fearing individual and assume he is nice and has good intentions, while that is not the case, because Machiavelli says that he accomplished things under the cloak of religion while having no faith, no integrity, no mercy, no humanity. And Machiavelli even goes further to say that if he did have mercy, if he did have faith, if he was influenced by such motives, he would have been ruined, meaning unable to lead, unable to maintain power, unable to deal with the people who were trying to take him down, which is a clear indication that to lead any mass, you must be iron, but you needn't market yourself as a person with an iron fist. Remember, you keep your iron fist within a velvet glove. This quotation about Ferdinand of Aragon is important whether you're a prince in a hereditary or a newly acquired principality. The next quotation is from page 14, and it is as follows. Men will not look at things as they are, but rather as they wish them to be. Men will not look at things as they are, but rather as they wish them to be. Which is to say that the average person is not trying to see the truth. They're trying to see what they want to see. And this is how that plays out. Let me give you an example. In the earlier quote, Machiavelli points out that the leader, Ferdinand of Aragon, cloaked himself in religion, but he wasn't really religious in his practice, in his behavior. Well, how is it that people believed he was religious? Well, because men do not see things as they are, they see things as they want them to be, which means that if he's ruling a population and that populace is composed of devout Catholics, they believe in God. And because they believe in God and they think Catholicism is great, they project their values and thoughts onto the leader, saying, well, we know God is great. He probably does too. Of course he's religious. Of course he believes in the Lord. Of course he's keeping the 10 Commandments. They project it. They don't see the reality as it is. They see the world as they wish it to be. Because they're Catholic, they want the leader to be Catholic. So when he says he's Catholic, that's what they wanted to hear. That's what they're going to see. So that's a really meaningful tip to apply in your life. It's easier to mislead or deceive someone when you are telling them what they want to hear. You've probably noticed, especially with women, there's certain things that they like to hear or see from you as a man. So if you know that they want to hear that you love them and you tell them that you love them, you can then instrumentalize love. You can use it to your own aim, even if you're actually not in love. And they will believe it because men do not see the world as it is. They see it as they wish it to be. And when I say men, if you really know the English language, men or man represents man and woman. Chapter 2, Machiavelli points out that hereditary principalities are easier to hold and easier to regain. And that is because the subjects are already conditioned to you ruling them, to you leading them. And a hereditary prince has very little cause to offend his subjects because they're already conditioned. They're already obeying the laws. They're already docile. You're not bringing anything new. You're continuing on with what your father, the king, had already established in the land. So when he says that they're easier to hold, that's because you don't have to change. You're just maintaining. He says they're easier to regain, which is to say, if a hereditary prince is deposed or taken out of power in his own land, it's easier for him to regain power because certainly he has long-standing relationship. That is, his family, his royal family, has a long-standing relationship with that population. So surely he has some supporters there. So if he needs to rise back up to regain power, shouldn't be too hard to do. And in fact, in Machiavelli's own life, this is something that clearly occurred. The Medici family was ruling Florence, and then they were taken out of power. Then the Republic controlled Florence, and Machiavelli worked for the Florentine Republic as a diplomat. And then the Medici family regained power. You see, it's a clear example from his actual life, although he doesn't reference it directly in the book, because this book was an offering to the magnificent Lorenzo di Piero di Medici, the current leader. So he didn't want to offend their family in this book because this book was indeed supposed to be a gift to the prince or to the leader. After describing what makes a hereditary principality easy to govern or rule, Machiavelli then goes on to describe what makes a newly acquired principality easy to govern or to rule. He says if you acquire a new principality and you share a language and a culture with your subjects, it will be easier for you to rule them. Be sure not to modify their laws or their taxes. This makes perfect sense because psychologically human beings do not do well with overt change, because change means work and human beings are lazy. They do not want to learn new things. They do not want to have to work on adopting new laws and things like that. And surely they don't want their taxes altered because no one wants to pay more money to anybody, right? Other than themselves. So he gives that recommendation that if you're taking over a land and they share your culture and language, you'll have an easier time, which oppositely, if you take over a land and they don't share your culture and language, you will have a hard time ruling them. Further, he says, do not alter the basics of taxes and laws, which is to say that when you show up as the new boss, you can't show up saying, yeah, we're going to change that, we're going to change that, we're going to change that. That will cause unrest among the population. You might ask yourself, how does this apply to my life, Marquette? You're talking about principalities. Well, I'll answer that for you. I'll give you one example from my life. When I was running a technology company, I opened an office in Puerto Rico. And all of a sudden, I had basically created a principality in a foreign land where I didn't share a language or a culture with the people I was ruling, so to speak, right? I walk into my office, everyone's Puerto Rican except me. They're Puerto Rican, I'm black. Everyone's first language is Spanish except me. Their first language is Spanish, mine is English. So we're radically disconnected, yet I am their leader as the CEO of that company and the person newly creating that office. So certainly there were things I did not understand about them, and there was a lot of unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity creates a distance. There's a lack of trust, a lack of rapport, makes it harder for you to control, harder for you to influence, and harder, frankly, for you to understand them and for them to understand you. So that was a new principality for me. And Machiavelli's advice to rulers on how to deal with a new principality where you don't share the language and culture, that can be used for you as well in your life today. I'm going to share that with you now. Machiavelli writes on page 22, quote, "Natural and common necessity, which always causes a new prince to burden those who have submitted to him with his soldiery and with infinite other hardships which he must put upon a new acquisition." Machiavelli is essentially saying that it is natural and common that when you acquire a new territory, you must burden them with your soldiers, meaning that you must assume that because these folks are unfamiliar with you, there are levels of distrust, there are levels of disdain, and so you have to put your soldiers there to keep the peace. He says there are also other hardships that they will be burdened with. When you've conquered a new land, surely you will have to extract wealth out of that land to cover the expenses that you incurred in taking over the land, right? Meaning that you had to wage war to take over this land. You now need to pull some wealth out of that country so that you can cover your military expenses, your salary for your soldiers, all these different things. I experienced the same thing. When I created my office in Puerto Rico, one of the things that I did was I put my soldiers into that population. What I mean by that is I took employees that I had from the mainland US, brought them into the office in Puerto Rico so that they could be my eyes and ears. They could also help create culture and influence culture there. They were like my soldiers. They were there to protect me and protect the culture that I wanted. Also, similarly, I incurred a lot of expenses in opening up an office there in Puerto Rico, right? The expenses to pay for the office, the expenses for new equipment, things like this. So I had to make sure I could get that value out of those new workers. So I had to work them really hard to make sales. I had to have them work a lot of hours and really have a lot of pressure on them to produce so that we could cover the expenses of opening this new office. The important thing that you get from this quotation I just shared with you from page 22 is that when you acquire a new principality, meaning when you come as a leader of a new group that you do not share a culture or a language with, you already know that you should anticipate that you need to have soldiers there on the ground, meaning people who you know for sure support you, and they can be your eyes and ears, and they can keep the population calm and also report back to you. You also know that you will have to put this new population under hardship. Hardship might come in the form of change. Hardship might come in the form of, hey, we have to work really hard because we need to put some points on the board because I'm new and you're new. Or we need to recover the expenses of creating this new office, whatever the case is. But what Machiavelli is allowing you to do is he's allowing you to anticipate. You cannot dominate unless you can anticipate. So when you come in the door as a new leader and you're leading people that do not share your culture, they do not share your language, there's some level of disconnect, you already know that you can anticipate some level of distrust. You can anticipate the necessity of putting some of your people amongst them. You can anticipate the need that you'll have to put them through hardship, so you can create their expectations appropriately so they know what's going to happen. Page 22, quote, "You have enemies in all of those whom you have injured in seizing that principality," which is to say that when you take power, someone had to lose power. If you're in a job and you're going up for a promotion against someone else, you better believe they're not going to love you for taking the job they could have had. Or if someone is demoted and you're the person who takes over their role, you best believe now that that person has been demoted and put under you, you're going to have a disgruntled worker on your hands. So he's ensuring that you're always on the lookout for enemies. Machiavelli's book, The Prince, is not only about acquiring power, but also maintaining power and making sure you don't lose power. A major component of it is dealing with the many people who would nibble away at your power or seek to take you down. I think today we call them haters. Quote, "In entering a province, one always has need of the goodwill of the natives," end quote. So what he's saying on page 22 is that when you take over something new, the people who are already there, you need their goodwill. Ideally, you want to have a good relationship with them so that they support your new rule. Without the natives, you will have tremendous amounts of trouble because the natives, aka the people who are already there, they know the system, they know the lay of the land, they know all of the things that will make it easier for you to operate. So having them as friends who can assist you in managing and ruling is absolutely critical. Here's this next quotation from page 24. "When states are acquired in a country differing in language, customs, or laws, there are difficulties, and good fortune and great energy are needed to hold them. And one of the greatest and most real helps would be that he who has acquired them should go and reside there. This would make his position more secure and durable, as it has made that of the Turk in Greece," end quote. That was page 24. This is so insightful. He's saying that when you've acquired a new territory and you got different customs, different laws, different language, different culture, the smartest thing you can do is go and be among the people, live among them, let them see you, make sure you can see them, because you being right there on the spot allows you to get a fingertip feel for who these people are. From a distance, you can never truly understand. From a distance, when you have someone else there operating on your behalf in this new principality or this new office, you're not going to get the best information. You should be there on the ground. This is absolutely genius. When I opened a new office in my company, even though I already had an office in South Korea, I had an office in St. Louis, an office in Chicago, an office in Pennsylvania, an office in Baltimore, I still went to Puerto Rico to that office because it was the newest one. It was the one that needed me most to make sure that it got off the ground strongly. So what you need to know is that it is worth being on the ground and having your boots on the ground so that you can really make sure that your new foundation is strong. And Machiavelli explains to you why this is absolutely necessary. Here's the very pithy and meaningful quotation that explains it. Page 24, quote, "If one is on the spot, disorders are seen before they spring up, and one can quickly remedy them. But if one is not at hand," from page 20, Machiavelli describes the very reason that you need to be right there among the people. Quote, "If one is on the spot, disorders are seen as they spring up, and one can quickly remedy them. But if one is not at hand, they are heard of only when they are great, and then one can no longer remedy them. End quote. Ooh, very meaningful. He's saying if you're right there, as soon as a problem is about to occur, you can nip it in the bud. You can basically address the problem when it's in its infancy. If you're far away, the problem grows up into something that is too big for you to solve. Because by the time you hear about it, it's already a big thing. You need to be close at hand so that you can see the problem when it's small, because small problems are easier to crush. Big problems will crush you. Quote, "Those whom he offends, remaining poor and scattered, are never able to injure him." End quote. Page 25. What Machiavelli is saying is that if, as a prince, you offend someone or you injure someone, you hurt them in some way, which inevitably you will have to do. There's no such thing as ruling a country or a land and never making anyone mad, never hurting anyone. Impossible. So when you do injure or hurt someone, your goal is to leave them scattered and poor, meaning disunited, unable to come together to organize and protest, and poor, meaning they do not have the financial, intellectual, or social capital needed to go at you. And speaking of this quotation, it might make you think of something called COVID-19. It's leaving people scattered and poor, right? Social distancing is keeping us all separate. So you can't come together to protest anything, right? You can't amass to do a rally. And you even have YouTube and Facebook, and they basically, if they don't like what you post, if it's too political, they'll just take it down. And it's also leaving you poor because it's hurting the economy. People don't have their jobs, so it's making sure that you cannot accumulate wealth. Curious. Another quotation from page 25. Quote, "Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot. Therefore, the injury that is to be done to a man ought to be of such a kind, not stand in fear of revenge." End quote. I think you understood that one, but I'll clarify anyways. What he's basically saying is if you do a small injury to someone, you must always fear that they will come back and attack you. When you do engage someone physically or with force, you should crush them, meaning cripple them, destroy them, do away with them, either murder them or hurt them so badly you don't have to ever worry about them again. You don't have to be in fear of revenge. A meaningful example, growing up in a ghetto, there were definitely times in which I knew if I got into a beef with someone, whether I won or lost the fight, it wouldn't really matter, because if I lost the fight, then I know I'd have to go and address it. I'd have to get revenge on them. If I won the fight, I'd have to worry about them coming to get revenge on me, maybe with a knife, maybe with a gun. So taking Machiavelli's advice, the way to operate is, hey, if someone wants a problem with you, you either avoid it or you engage it. And if you engage it, you make sure that you cripple them. You put them in a wheelchair so you don't ever have to worry about them coming back to attack you. You see what I'm saying? So it's a very meaningful piece of advice. He's saying if you're going to engage someone, go all the way. Do not do a little injury. Make sure you devastate them. Page 27, quote, "In the beginning of the malady, it is easy to cure but difficult to detect. But in the course of time, not having been either detected or treated in the beginning, it becomes easy to detect but difficult to cure." End quote. Malady is like a sickness, right? So it's saying in the beginning of a sickness, it's easy to cure but difficult to detect. When it's hard to identify early stage cancer, but at the early stage, it's easy to cure. It's easy to identify late stage cancer, but at the late stage, it's incurable. It's going to kill you. So what he's basically encouraging you again is vigilance. He's saying, see these problems before they get big and address them, which to translate for you, he's saying, don't let anything slide. He also is saying, you should kill an ant with a sledgehammer. You understand? Address it while it's a small problem, but address it so thoroughly that that ant will never be able to function enough to hurt you again or to form any weapon against you. Chapter 3 is all about vigilance, protecting your power. Many of you already have power. You're the manager or the supervisor at your job. But just because you have that title doesn't mean that you're safe, doesn't mean people won't try to undermine you. You may be the head of your household as the man of the house, as a father, as a husband, or what have you. Doesn't mean people aren't going to undermine you. Doesn't mean people aren't going to flex on you, try to weaken your position, try to take away your respect. So this chapter 3 is all about protecting your power. If your power is not growing, it is shrinking. Power must be grown consistently, if only by centimeters. This is something that you might forget to think about. Sometimes you get relaxed and comfortable and think, well, I'm the man of the house, or I'm the boss at my job, whatever the case is. But you must always reassert that, reestablish it, and reaffirm it. Not only in your mind, but also in the minds of those who are subject to you. You don't think that every now and then your wife won't talk crazy to you? You don't think that every now and then your kids won't test you and disobey you? You don't think that every now and then your employees won't try to get away with something? Your number one goal should be to anticipate so that you can dominate. To make sure that you've thought of what they're going to do before they do it, so that you are regularly exercising power so that they know who has the power and that they're in fear of that power being exercised against them, because they know you are the one who kills an ant with a sledgehammer. And whether you're protecting your power from people within your principality or others outside of your principality, you should know the following. And this is a quotation from Marquette Devon Burton that was inspired by what I read on page 31. War is not to be avoided. It is only to be deferred until it is to your advantage. Again, war is not to be avoided. It is only to be deferred until it is to your advantage. What I mean by that is the following. We tend to sometimes want to avoid war or avoid a conflict with someone. Being conflict avoidant will cause you problems. Let me give you a short example. I remember when I was in high school, there was a young lady who was dating a well-known gangster. And she was infatuated with me. So she kept asking me to call her and kept just like really coming at me hard. And I told her, Shorty, you're dealing with Terrell. I can't deal with you. And she was like, no, but I like you. I was like, no, you're dealing with Terrell. And the only reason I avoided taking her down like a hitman, because she was an attractive girl, I avoided that because I didn't want a war with Terrell. Why? Because he's a gangster and I was super thorough my damn self. And I had a lot of gangsters around me. He had a lot of gangsters around him. So I knew it would be protracted warfare, meaning that we would both be engaging in conflict until somebody ended up dead, period. So I was trying to avoid the situation. Would you believe that? Because I kept rebuffing her, I kept shutting her down when she would make advances on me, she ended up getting mad at me and calling up her older brother, who was even more of a gangster than Terrell. And her older brother and his homie from his gang came down and caught me at work when I was about to go to work and jumped me. And then we ended up in a protracted war anyways. Now my people are going at their people. So war is not war cannot be avoided, meaning you cannot not do it. You'd be wise to defer it, meaning push it out to a time when it's to your advantage, meaning that you're going to have to go to war. But you just need to make sure that when you do go to war, you're in a position to win. So that is something you really need to have in your mind. When you go to work, you need to look around and say, I got some enemies in here, and know that you're going to have to go to war with them. Just wait until you're in the strong position so you can crush them. If you're already in the strong position, go ahead and crush them. This book, analysis and review of Machiavelli's The Prince, is presented to you courtesy of a request from one of my followers who sent through a donation and said, I need you to go through this book. So here it is. I just wanted to give you a taste of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. If you've not read it, it gets even better as it goes on. If you want to hear the other 7 other videos that I do in reviewing this book, make sure you sign up at www.patreon.com/thesaintandthesinner. There you can see all of the videos I'm doing to review this book, as well as a multitude of other informational videos that will help you acquire more money and do better in your relationships.